That morning I went out because of something I could not explain. A sound near the east fence I had not walked since the accident. I told myself it was a fox, maybe a raccoon that had gotten through the wire. I grabbed the old work gloves from the hook by the door and went out anyway. The east field looked exactly the way it had looked for 3 years. Overgrown at the edges, the fence post Danny had promised to fix still leaning the same way it had been leaning the morning everything changed. Had the same pale Georgia sky, the same silence that had never felt like peace. In the frost-flattened grass near the collapsed section of fence crouched a puppy, small, trembling, tawny gray with a rust stripe running down its spine. But something about it was clearly wrong. The muzzle was too long, the ears too large, the paws so outsized for its body, it looked like it was wearing boots that didn't belong to it. I crouched down, and it did not bolt. It did not whimper. It simply looked at me, steady, amber eyes, completely unafraid, the way no dog puppy looks at a stranger. I reached out a hand. It didn't move. I held still for a moment, then carefully picked it up. It was warm, barely, and weighed almost nothing. I tucked it inside my jacket and felt it stop trembling almost immediately. I walked back to the house already telling myself this was temporary. I called the veterinary clinic on Route 9 and described what I had found. And the receptionist put me straight through to Dr. Sarah Callan. I told her about the markings, the proportions, the eyes. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone thinking, but the pause of someone very carefully deciding what to say next. She told me to come in within the hour. Her voice was calm, the way a voice gets calm when it is working to stay that way. I noticed it. I didn't understand it yet. I looked down at the pup inside my jacket. It looked back up at me without blinking. I grabbed my keys. Dr. Sarah Callan did not greet him at the front desk. The receptionist, a teenager with braces who barely looked up from her phone, told Marcus to go straight through to the back. That was the first unusual thing. The second was that the back room was empty, except for the examination table, a single overhead light, and Dr. Callan standing with her arms crossed, already waiting. She was younger than Marcus had expected. Mid-30s, precise in her movements, and with the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have learned to think before they speak. She gestured to the table without saying anything. Marcus unzipped his jacket and lifted the pup out carefully. It made no sound. It simply looked around the room with those steady amber eyes, taking inventory. Dr. Callan leaned in. She did not touch the animal immediately. She looked at the spine, the muzzle, the paws, the way the ears sat on the skull. Her face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. A small, controlled shift, like a door closing quietly in a house where everyone is supposed to be asleep. She straightened up and asked Marcus where exactly he had found it. He told her. The east fence, the frost grass. The sound he couldn't explain. She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are not really responding to what you said, but to what it confirms. Then she asked him to wait, stepped into the side office, and closed the door behind her. Through the wall, Marcus could hear her voice, low, even, deliberate, not alarmed, careful. There is a difference. The pup sat on the examination table and looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. He thought about leaving. He thought about it seriously, just picking the animal up, walking out, putting it back where he found it, and returning to the 11 days of silence he had been managing perfectly well. He stayed where he was. 8 minutes later, Dr. Callan came back. Behind her, and filling the doorway, was a county sheriff's deputy, and behind him, a woman in a gray field jacket Marcus had never seen before, holding credentials he didn't need to read to understand. Dr. Callan looked at Marcus steadily and said, "I'm sorry. I had to make that call." Marcus looked at the deputy, then at the woman in the gray jacket, then down at the pup, still sitting calmly on the table as if none of this was its problem. "What is it?" he asked. Dr. Callan said, "That's what they're here to explain." Her name was Agent Dara Finch. She worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, out of the Atlanta field office, and she had been working a trafficking case for 14 months. She told Marcus this the way someone tells you the time, straightforward, with no particular warmth attached. She had short hair, a notepad, and the specific quality of attention that law enforcement develops when they are not yet certain whether you are a witness or a problem. But they sat in the clinic's small waiting room after the receptionist was sent home early. The deputy stood near the door. The pup had been moved to a carrier that Finch had produced from her vehicle, and it sat on the floor between them, watching everything. Finch asked Marcus how long he had lived on the property, whether he had ever been to the Pine Brook Wildlife Reserve 40 miles north, whether he knew anyone who dealt in exotic or rare animals, whether the name Roy Calloway meant anything to him. Marcus answered each question the same way. No. Not recently. No. No. Finch wrote things down. She did not tell him what she was writing. She asked the same questions slightly differently a second time, which Marcus recognized from years of ranger work as the standard technique for catching contradictions. He had none. His answers were the same. He asked what the animal was. Finch studied him for a moment, making a decision. Then she told him, Red wolf, Canis rufus, federally protected under the Endangered Species Act, fewer than 20 known individuals remaining in the wild. Part of a carefully managed captive breeding program, a program that, 7 weeks ago, had reported one pup stolen during a routine transport. Marcus sat with that for a moment. He looked at the carrier on the floor, at the amber eyes watching him through the mesh. He said, I found it in a field. Finch said, I know. She said it in a way that suggested she was beginning to believe him, and that this was not entirely welcome news, because it meant the answer was somewhere else, and she didn't have it yet. They took the pup that evening. A second vehicle arrived, a white government SUV with a wire crate in the back, and a handler Marcus was not introduced to loaded the carrier in without ceremony. Marcus stood in the clinic parking lot and watched the SUV pull out onto Route 9 and disappear. But he drove home. He did not take the shortcut through town because he did not want to pass the diner or the hardware store or any of the places where people who knew him might wave. He took the long way through the county road that ran along the tree line, and the truck cab was quiet, except for the heater blowing and the sound of gravel under the tires. He did not sleep well, and in the morning he made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the frost on the east field and did not move for a long time. There was a flattened patch in the frost-killed grass near the fence where he had crouched down the morning before. He could see it from the window. At 9:15, Agent Finch called. Her voice was the same as the day before, measured, professional. But underneath it was something that might have been reluctance. She told him that the pup, I designated RF7 in the program's records, had refused food since being transferred to the federal holding facility. It had retreated to the back of the crate and had not moved toward the handlers. The facility's senior vet had attempted a welfare assessment that morning, and the animal had become severely distressed. They had tried 2 different approaches. Neither worked. Finch told Marcus they needed him to come in, just for an assessment, just to see if the animal would settle in a familiar presence. Marcus looked at the flattened frost in the field. He said he would be there by noon. He arrived at 11:40. The facility was a low concrete building set back from the road behind a pine windbreak, clean and functional and entirely without warmth. The handler who met him at the door did not make conversation. He led Marcus down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and cedar bedding and stopped outside a heavy door. Now Marcus went in alone. The crate was in the corner. He crouched down in front of it and said nothing. After about 30 seconds, the pup moved forward, pressed its nose to the mesh, and exhaled once, a long, slow breath. Behind the observation window, Marcus could see the handler and a woman he didn't recognize both watching. Neither of them spoke. He stayed crouched on the concrete floor for 20 minutes, and the pup stayed at the front of the crate the entire time. Amber eyes steady, and Marcus felt something in his chest shift in a way he did not have a name for yet. The woman he had seen through the observation window was Dr. Eunice Croft, the facility director. She was in her 60s, gray-haired and unhurried, with the manner of someone who had spent a long career watching people react to difficult information and had learned to give them room for it. She found Marcus in the corridor afterward and walked him to her office and offered him coffee, and which he accepted without thinking. She told him about the Red Wolf program, the history of it, the decades of effort, the breeding protocols, how every animal had a designation and a file and a lineage going back years. She told him about RF7's mother, currently in a managed habitat in North Carolina. She told him what the theft had meant to the program, not just the loss of the animal, but the breach, the violation of a system built on precise trust. Marcus listened. Then he held the coffee cup and listened. And then Dr. Croft said something that made him stop hearing anything else for several seconds. She said they had a volunteer program. College students mostly, sometimes local residents who applied through the Wildlife Service. Good program. She remembered a young man from Colby County, 3 summers ago now. Sharp kid. Natural instinct with the animals, especially the wolves. Name of Danny Hale. And the coffee cup was warm in his hands, and Marcus concentrated on that, the warmth, the weight of it, while the rest of the room went slightly distant. He asked her to say the name again. She did. She saw his face then and understood, and she was quiet for a moment in the way that Dr. Callan had been quiet, careful, giving him the space. Danny had never told him. Marcus had known his son volunteered somewhere that summer, had assumed it was the County Park Service. Had not asked for details because Danny was 17 and private about things, and Marcus had respected that the way fathers respect the small territories their sons begin to claim. He had not asked. Now, he could not ask. He drove home and went straight to Danny's room and sat on the edge of the bed. He did not turn on the light. He sat in the dark with his hands on his knees and thought about his son standing in a corridor like the one he had just walked. I crouched in front of a crate exactly like he had crouched this morning, earning the trust of something wild and endangered and worth protecting. He sat there for a long time. Finch came to the farm 2 days later. She sat at Marcus's kitchen table with a folder and a mug of coffee she barely touched and laid it out without ceremony, the way she did everything. The network had been operating for 3 years across 4 states, Georgia, Tennessee, the Carolinas. And they moved rare and protected animals on a supply and demand basis, connecting private collectors to specific animals sourced through contacts inside legitimate wildlife facilities. Not opportunistic poaching, organized, patient. Someone inside the breeding program had been feeding them intake schedules, transport windows, facility codes. RF7 had been taken during a routine transfer between facilities, a 40-minute drive on a Tuesday morning with a 2-person team, and then somewhere in those 40 minutes a window had opened that someone had been waiting months to use. The pup ended up dumped near Marcus's east fence because the courier had seen a wildlife checkpoint appearing on the highway and panicked. He had pulled onto a county road, opened the crate, and driven away. RF7 had been in the frost grass for somewhere between 6 and 10 hours before Marcus found her. Marcus looked at the folder on the table. He did not touch it. He asked Finch what happened to animals that reached private buyers. She told him honestly. They disappeared. Off-record, off-grid, into collections where no federal authority could reach without a lengthy legal process that usually ended in nothing. For a red wolf, it meant the end of its contribution to the program, the end of its genetic line's future in the wild. It meant a life in a controlled space for the entertainment of one person who could afford to buy the rarest thing available. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the east field was bright with early afternoon light. The leaning fence post threw a long shadow across the grass. He said, "She was out there alone for 10 hours. Finch said, "Yes." He nodded once, slowly, the way he had seen Finch nod. Not in response to what was said, but to what it confirmed. He had been at the facility for 3 hours that afternoon. RF-7 had eaten for the first time, a small amount. I pressed close to the mesh of the crate while Marcus sat on the other side of it, and Dr. Croft had stood in the doorway watching with an expression she tried to keep professional and mostly succeeded. Marcus drove home along the county road feeling something he couldn't quite categorize. Not good, exactly. More like functional, more like a man with somewhere to be in the morning. He saw the barn door from the driveway. It was standing open at an angle that meant the latch had been forced. The wood around the bolt split cleanly outward. He sat in the truck for a moment before he got out. He walked to the barn and pushed the door wider and stood in the entrance, letting his eyes adjust. The tractor was there. The tool rack, the feed barrels, the old chest freezer, all of it in place. Nothing of obvious value missing, but the hayloft ladder had been moved. And when he climbed up, he found the loose board in the corner pulled back and the space beneath it disturbed. An old tin he kept up there pushed aside, its contents scattered. In the dust near the wall, half hidden under loose straw, he found a phone. Cracked screen, dark. He picked it up in a rag and turned it over. The back panel was warm in a way that meant the battery was recently dead, not long dead. He called Finch from the kitchen. She arrived within 40 minutes, which told him she had not been far. She took the phone in an evidence bag without touching it, walked the barn without comment, asked Marcus the same careful questions she always asked, same ones, slightly differently the second time. He answered them the same way. Before she left, she paused at the truck and looked at him steadily. She said that whoever had come was not looking for tools or equipment. She said they had come looking for the pup, and that when they did not find it, they had gone through the loft, looking for something else, possibly records, possibly contacts. She said he should lock the east gate. He told her the east gate had no lock. She said he should get one. The cracked phone took Finch's team 4 days. On the 5th day, she called Marcus and asked if the name Roy Calloway meant anything to him. He said it did. Feed and supply operation over in Harwick, 1 town east. He had bought fence wire from Calloway's place twice in the last year. Saturday mornings, Roy Calloway ate at the Route 9 diner, booth by the window, same as clockwork, biscuits, and black coffee. Friendly man. Remembered names. The kind of man who made you feel known without actually knowing you. Finch asked Marcus to say if there was anything about Calloway that had seemed unusual. Marcus thought about it and said no. Then he thought about it longer and said nothing for a moment. He told her he would call her back. He drove out to Harwick the following morning, not to Calloway's business on the main road, but to the property behind it, a stretch of land that ran back to the tree line with a secondary building Marcus had noticed once from the county road and not thought about again. He parked on the shoulder a quarter-mile back and walked through the tree line on foot, the way he had walked 1,000 stretches of Georgia woodland in his ranger years, low and quiet and patient. What he saw from the trees was enough. The secondary building had reinforced ventilation, wire runs behind it, newer than the rest of the property. A white panel van with no markings backed to the loading door. A man he didn't recognize on a phone, checking a tablet. The body language of someone managing a schedule. Marcus stood in the trees for about 2 minutes. Then he walked back to his truck and drove to the county road and pulled over and called Finch. and she listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds and then said he should not go back there. He said he understood. She said she needed him to have come to this on his own and that it mattered that he had. He asked her what that meant. She said she would explain later that right now he should go home and stay there. He drove home and sat at the kitchen table and waited, and that was the hardest part. Finch moved on Calloway the following Thursday. And Marcus knew this because she had told him it was coming, told him to stay inside and not answer the door for anyone he did not recognize. He had agreed to this and meant it, and was sitting in the kitchen at 10:15 that night, reading nothing, just holding a book, when headlights swept across the kitchen wall. Not one vehicle, 2. He heard the truck doors and then boots on gravel. Too many boots for a neighbor, too slow for law enforcement. And he stood up and moved to the side of the kitchen window and looked out without putting himself in the light. Roy Calloway was crossing the yard with 2 men behind him, both larger than Calloway, both moving with the specific, purposeful quiet of men who had done this before. Calloway knocked on the door and called Marcus's name. He said he'd just wanted to talk. He said there had been a misunderstanding, and he thought they could sort it out between themselves. Marcus stood in the dark kitchen and thought about Danny's room at the end of the hall and the lean of the fence post in the east field and the weight of a wolf pup pressing its nose to wire mesh. He thought about what 3 years of silence does to a man. Not weakens him, exactly. More like removes the parts of him that hesitate. He called Finch's number and left the line open on the counter. And then he opened the back door and went out the other side of the house and came around through the barn. What followed was not clean, and he would not describe it as something he managed well. Calloway's 2 men were faster than he expected, and he was slower than he used to be, and there was a period near the fence line that he would not think about in detail afterward. But Finch's team came through the gate at 11 minutes past 10, and that was the end of it. Calloway was taken without incident, which somehow surprised Marcus more than anything else about the night. He sat on the porch steps with a cut above his eyebrow and a deputy pressing a cloth to it, and watched the blue lights move across the yard, and felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely present. The trafficking network took 6 weeks to unravel fully. Arrests in 3 states, a federal warrant executed on a property in Tennessee, a collector in South Carolina who had acquired 4 protected animals in 18 months and would spend the next several years explaining that to a federal judge. Finch called Marcus with updates occasionally, brief and factual, the way she did everything. He found he had come to recognize the sound of her thinking in the pauses. RF7 was returned to the breeding program in the 3rd week. Dr. Croft called personally. She said the animal had stabilized well, was eating properly, and was showing the behavioral markers they needed to see. She said they were cautiously optimistic about eventual release into a managed habitat in North Carolina, near where the mother's territory was mapped. She said one more thing before she hung up. She said that red wolves were known to retain strong associative memory, that an animal raised through early life with a particular human presence could, years later, recognize that person by scent alone. And that if RF7 were released into the managed territory, and Marcus were ever in that territory, it was not impossible that she would find him. Not guaranteed, but not impossible. Marcus thanked her and held the phone for a moment after the call ended. Reese called that same evening. His daughter had seen a brief news item, local man involved in federal wildlife case, and had put it together and called without planning to. Not the way you call someone when the reason not to suddenly seems smaller than the reason to. They talked for 40 minutes. Marcus told her most of it, not all of it. Reese told him she was coming for Thanksgiving, which was 6 weeks away, which she stated as a fact rather than a question. Marcus said that was fine. After the call, he walked out to the east fence in the dark. He stood at the collapsed section, and looked at the tree line for a while. The frost grass was back, and the leaning post still leaned. He left the gate open when he went inside. In the morning, he put food near the fence line, as he had begun doing without deciding to. He went back in, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen window. The food would probably be gone by noon, deer most likely, or raccoons, or nothing. But he put it there anyway. He had something to check on in the morning now. That was enough to start with.